Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is New York City Councilmember Tiffany Caban. Councilmember, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited for this conversation today, especially because I think you can provide a really unique perspective from the lens of a former public defender, as well as the lens of a current New York City council member. As we know, controversy continues to swirl around New York City Mayor Eric Adams, and it's really embroiled the entire Big Apple. Last fall, the mayor was slapped with bribery, wire fraud, and campaign finance-related charges over allegedly accepting illegal campaign donations from the Turkish government. And just today, a federal judge vacated Adams' trial date, but did not drop the charges despite the DOJ's requests. You and I talked about the charges initially in the fall, but what are your thoughts on the situation now as it continues to develop even today?
It's a lot, and it's a lot to keep track of. My thoughts, to fast forward to the conclusion is that this man cannot continue to be our mayor. He needs to be removed for the sake of New Yorkers. But I want to take a step back and kind of break down what has happened since we last talked, actually. Eric Adams, as folks know, is the first sitting mayor of New York City to be criminally indicted. And like you mentioned, it was for these corruption and bribery charges, and also those illegal campaign donations from the Turkish government. The way that our campaign finance system works results in public matching funds here. And so the allegations include essentially stealing millions of taxpayer dollars because of these illegal donations. Now, recently, Eric Adams told government workers since the inauguration of President Trump, right, to comply with ICE entering their buildings, which is a really big 180 from the fact that we are a sanctuary city. We do not cooperate with ICE and immigration enforcement. And so he told this to his commissioners, and he also told them not to criticize the Trump administration. And that's got people at that time asking, well, why? And it's because we find out later on that the U.S. attorneys prosecuting his case were actually on the verge of charging the mayor with additional crimes, including destroying evidence and telling employees to lie to the FBI on top of those existing corruption charges, right? So this is a big deal. And then the Trump administration directs all the charges to be dropped, specifically so that Adams can help him deport New Yorkers. And they said that the Justice Department delivers this letter to the Southern District of New York, the office that is prosecuting the mayor, and in writing they say it. They say, listen, we're not questioning the integrity of the prosecutors in this case. We're not even looking at the strength of the case against the mayor. What we're saying is these charges need to be dropped because the mayor needs to be unencumbered to be able to follow through with the federal agenda to deport families. And so they want the charges dropped so that he can help carry out this mission, right? And so that's a clear quid pro quo. And then the former U.S. Attorney Danielle Sassoon, who was in that office, the Southern District, she resigned over this. She basically wrote this out in a letter. It's like, this is not the job I signed up for. This is not what we do. And then last week, we saw that Fox interview where, the mayor, in my opinion, publicly humiliated all of New York by kissing up to the family separation czar Tom Homan on television, right? And Homan, he says to the mayor on live television, hey, if you don't comply with Trump's mass deportation and family separation plans, he's going to be, quote, up Eric Adams's butt, right? And so, I mean, it was wild. It was a wild thing to watch, but this is what it boils down to. Mayor Eric Adams is compromised. He sacrificed the immigrant community of New York. He's sacrificing the basic functioning of our city government in return for his own freedom from prosecution. And so where we find ourselves today is the judge sort of entertaining this motion to dismiss the charges.
A flurry of the city's top officials resigned over these allegations of quid pro quo. The argument you laid out what was quid pro quo. You don't think Mayor Eric Adams is effectively able to run this city. Mayor Eric Adams was on the Fox and Friends couch with Borders czar Tom Homan, and he didn't say that this was quid pro quo. He said that he agreed with the Trump administration and Homan that they both wanted to get, quote, dangerous people off our streets. And he says, I'm not standing in the way, I'm collaborating. Direct quote from Mayor Eric Adams. What's your response to that?
Yeah. I mean, again, we're a sanctuary city for a reason, and actually, by the numbers, by the data, when we talk about, you know, the reason for this is crime and things like that, sanctuary cities per capita have substantially less crime than non-sanctuary cities, which I think is really interesting. And part of that is because you're not driving a particular group of people underground. So, you know, when you are targeting large-scale groups like our immigrant population, you have a situation where when they're the victims of crime or harm, they're too afraid to go to the police to get help. And to go to other institutions to get help, hospitals, whatever it is. When they are key witnesses or needed to help in some of these situations, they won't, because they're, again, scared of being deported. You have people who are too afraid to contribute to the economy. Folks that were working stop going to work. Kids that were going to school stop going to school because, you know, they're afraid. And so that doesn't make any of us safer. But also, we know that the city operation is compromised, and it's on top of already the mayor's deficiencies. He has had, over the course of his administration, appointing people that were just loyalists to him and not necessarily qualified or committed to doing the job. There were some good people in that administration doing good work, right? Because there are so many well-intentioned public servants, and especially at the rank and file level. We've seen the mayor cut the budgets of lots of city agencies, which means that our agencies are running on shoestring crews. And these are good public servants. And then most recently, we saw 4 deputy mayors resign from the administration. And these were career, dedicated, honest public servants who really believed in what they're doing. And so they were working under the conditions where they were trying to work with the mayor to benefit the needs of everyday New Yorkers. And then they figured out, we can't do that. We can't work with him. It's not working. And so they tried to work around him. And that's sort of the inside kind of baseball that I can give you, being a legislator in City Hall. They were trying to work around him to be able to protect New Yorkers and deliver for New Yorkers. And eventually they were saying, well, that's not working either. And so they came to the ultimate conclusion that they could not serve under his administration any longer. And so we saw them leave. You have an administration that you have all this leadership that's left. We don't have enough workers in our city workforce. And then you have this just cloud of scandal after scandal after scandal. And that's why the governor needs to remove him. And his actions speak louder than his words. We know that he's not standing up and protecting immigrant neighbors. He's not standing up and protecting our transgender and queer neighbors that are also under attack from the federal government. And, you know, he's been cozying up to the mayor, and we know why. To the president, I should say.
I'm curious what you think their relationship is like, and if that concerns you at all. Because on its face, he could say, hey, I want to work with this administration. I want to find common ground where I can. When he was in that Fox and Friends interview right next to Tom Homan, he said, we don't agree on everything. I don't even agree with myself some of the time, but I want to find common ground where we can. You don't think from this conversation that that's necessarily true. You think he's compromised, and that's why he's working, maybe taking a hardline stance on immigration?
Absolutely, right? Like I said, we are a sanctuary city. A lot of these actions are contrary to what our city and state laws are. You know, he's had conversations, like I said, about allowing ICE into our schools, our hospitals, our places of worship. It's really a confusing and scary time for not just the families that are at risk, but also the people who work in those buildings every single day and want to protect the people that, you know, they're there to protect. And this is a city where we support our immigrant neighbors. That is how it has always been. It's made New York City what it is.
I think that this is a really interesting conversation and time, because in my conversations with members of Congress, a lot of people just fight with their party, defend members of their party. And when I'm talking to members of city council, Democrats are criticizing Mayor Eric Adams. Republicans have said this is politicized. This is essentially boils down to a witch hunt because of his stance on immigration. What have your conversations inside with city council members been like?
You know, it's really interesting because, to your point, we have a very large Democratic majority, but in that majority, there's really a pretty wide political spectrum, from more moderate or conservative members to very, very progressive members, and then we have that Republican minority. And for the Democratic majority to come together and say it, and say this is not working, we cannot deliver government services, people are not getting the support that they need and expect from the government, and then you have the Republicans championing it. It says a lot of what you need to know about where the political alignment is, right? The Republicans are the ones that year round, at least in the city, who are always fighting to criminalize and demonize our immigrant neighbors. They're always fighting to try to erase the existence of our transgender, gender nonconforming queer neighbors. They're always the ones that are fighting against a lot of these positions. And so what you're just really seeing is the mayor align with them. And that certainly is not what the vast majority of New York City voters voted for.
I know that you said earlier you want Mayor Eric Adams out. Governor Kathy Hochul does have the power to oust Mayor Eric Adams, but she said she's not going to. She said that's not the will of the voters in New York City. However, she's going to put some guardrails on his power. What do you make of that, and what do you think those guardrails should be?
Yeah. I think the ultimate decision that should be made, again, is because this is completely untenable at this point, is that he should be removed. Now, what the governor has opted for are these proposed changes that would do a few things. They would create a new state deputy inspector general that's focused on New York City operations, and they would establish a fund for the city comptroller, the public advocate, and the city council speaker to hire this outside counsel to sue the federal government if the mayor is unwilling to do so. Which, think about that, right? Like, the mayor's job is to, when appropriate, sue the federal government on behalf of the people of New York City. And they're saying, well, we got to hire this outside person to do that because we can't trust that the mayor is going to. And they also want to grant additional funds to the state comptrollers, right? So the comptroller roles are like these fiscal watchdog roles to scrutinize city finances. And they also want to bar the mayor from firing the head of the city's Department of Investigation without approval of the state inspector general. Now, a couple of points to highlight here. The Department of Investigation is one of our oversight agencies in the city. We have, the CCRB, that's oversight over the police. We have the Board of Corrections, oversight over the correctional facilities. But essentially, these agencies have been highest on the chopping block funding-wise for this mayor. So year over year in our budget process, he proposes cutting these by up to sometimes it's by up to 40% of the budget. And these are the agencies that give all of us a look under the hood of what's happening in the mayor's city hall. So that paints a really clear picture also about what this mayor is about and what he's trying to do. And it's unfortunate that we have to have all of these guardrails because, as you can see, these guardrails cost money. And they're costing money at a time where the federal government is stealing money from us, literally, where, Elon Musk and Doge is coming in and snatching our city and state's money. But also, we're worried about funding reductions at the federal level. And now we've got to spend money to keep our mayor straight when there are lots of ways that we could be spending that money to support New Yorkers in this moment. So, I'm glad some action is being taken, but really at the end of the day, he is not in an ability to lead the city to govern with any level of efficiency, of effectiveness, or integrity. And, I think that another concern that the legislature has is that the governor intends for these special provisions to expire at the end of the year when the mayor's term expires. But there's that potential for renewal. And so there's this larger question of, we have to think long and hard before sort of curtailing the powers of any particular entities, because we have the executive offices, we have the legislative bodies, right, like the council, like the state assembly and the Senate, and we have the judiciary, and it's there to be a balance of powers. And so kind of messing with or adjusting those powers always creates some bigger fundamental questions.
I'm curious what you think about his political future, because he's indicated he's not stepping down. Governor Kathy Hochul has indicated she's not ousting him. But let's say he does get removed. His replacement would be New York City public advocate Jumaane Williams. What do you think of that replacement?
Yeah, I mean, Jumaane Williams has been a really strong public servant for a long time. He served in the city council. He has been the public advocate, and he has taken the fight to the mayor's door when it's really counted. And it's interesting because nobody wins here, right? The mayor gets removed. This is not going to be some just easy snap of the fingers transition where everything gets better, but it's going to be the job of the acting mayor to start at the most basic level of stabilizing our government. There are roles that have to be filled. There are directives that have to be given to clarify how we're going to move forward. And that is not an easy task, and we're all going to feel it, and we're all going to have to come together to help with that stabilization. I think that the public advocate is up for that job, and the sooner we get to that work, I think the better.
And there's a mayoral election this year. Emerson College polling has some numbers out of who voters want to see. While there's a large swath of New York City voters that are undecided, Adams is number 2, but number 1 is former Governor Andrew Cuomo. What do you think of that?
He's not an option. That's what I think of that. He's actually in some ways a similar leader to the current mayor. He is somebody who has shown that he has been corrupt. In fact, there have been multiple investigations that substantiated not just allegations, accusations of corruption, but of sexual harassment, right? And so we've seen him resign in disgrace over those really serious scandals. We saw how the COVID pandemic was handled, and what happened in our senior centers in New York, and how he sacrificed those folks to make himself look better in the midst of a crisis, right? There's lots of points that sort of sound really similar to what we're talking about now. And we don't need to go back to the Cuomo days. What we really, really need is something that neither of them can bring to the table or represent. We need a mayor who's going to fight for New Yorkers and not sell them out. We need a mayor who isn't corrupt, who's not in the middle of criminal investigations. We need a mayor who is a strong manager who's going to build up the municipal workforce and prioritize policies that are going to deliver for working class people. And in this moment, yeah, we need a mayor that's going to fight back against Trump and Musk's agenda, right? They're wrecking Social Security and Medicare. They're firing workers who keep our planes in the sky. They're firing national park rangers. They're firing the workers who test our waters to make sure it's not poisonous. They're shutting down cancer research and medicine development. And municipal governments are the front line to protect from those attacks at the federal level. And so we need a mayor that's committed to that, and committed to the infrastructure and the services and the funding that's going to keep us safe and healthy on an everyday basis. And thankfully in New York, we have something called ranked choice voting, which means that when we vote for mayor, we can actually vote for up to 5 candidates in our order of preference. And that way it's more democratic. The mayor is sort of like the more populist vote. Sometimes you have a field of 8 candidates and somebody wins the race by only having 30% of the vote. And you're like, well, how much of a mandate does that person have? But ranked choice voting kind of removes that and says, hey, this is actually the person with the most consensus across all of the city, and that's good. So what I can tell you about my ballot is that I will not be ranking Eric Adams. I will not be ranking Andrew Cuomo, and that I am going to make sure that I rank mayoral candidates that are going to do the things that I mentioned briefly. But some of those folks on that list are going to be City Comptroller Brad Lander, State Assembly Member Zohran Mamdani. There are other options in this race, and we're watching closely how it develops.
My last question to you then is, before that happens, before the election, as a New York City council member, what is your next action to deal with Mayor Eric Adams? Because obviously you still need to deal with him if he is the leader of the city, but do you feel hamstrung at all? Is he cooperative? Because you're saying, hey, he straight up can't lead.
It's very, very difficult at this point. I think I even mentioned before that our constituent services are suffering. It's much, much harder to get our constituents the help they need, whether it's making sure that their applications are moving for SNAP benefits, right? Food stamps, whether it's there's a hazardous condition in the building they live in and we need to get the Department of Buildings out there, whether there are unsafe and unsanitary conditions on our streets. All of these things, like I said, are shoestring budgets with skeleton crews and really hamstrung, and everything's taking longer. But then on these big policy issues, it's really hard to move stuff forward without that alignment and the capabilities of the other side of City Hall. We're getting ready. We're in the midst of negotiating our city budget. That's an over $100 billion budget that we have to negotiate. And the city charter mandates that we have a balanced budget by July 1st. And we have a mayor that can't even do the basics right now. How are we going to be able to negotiate this budget to make sure that there isn't an interruption in the services that we have and that we're building up where we need to? So it is a real problem, but our council is focused also on making sure that we are pushing through, introducing and passing legislation that's going to prevent the mayor from doing some of the president and Elon Musk's bidding, and also, increase the protections of the folks in New York City that are most vulnerable to both of those agendas. And it's added protections for workers, as we see the NLRB being eviscerated, as we are seeing workers' rights sort of being thrown out the window, taking care of our LGBTQIA plus neighbors, taking care of our immigrant neighbors. And the list just only starts there. We know that the Department of Education is being targeted. We know that women are going to be targeted. We know that other people of color are going to be targeted. And we are just responding with the urgency that this moment requires.
Councilmember, I really appreciate the conversation today because it's a local story for us as New Yorkers, and people who live in New York City. It's also a national story. So I appreciate your insight here. Thank you so much for joining me. You are welcome back anytime.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me again.